I welcome everyone to the Wednesday edition of Mixin with Mintz on YouTube. I'm your host, Ben Mintz, still kicking it here at summer camp in Oxford, Mississippi. Martin Black, our co-host and producer, back from Phoenix and Shreveport. Martin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing phenomenal, man. Well rested, back in the swing of being at home and wearing a collared shirt in honor of our esteemed guest today. And Stephen, I just want to say I'm born and raised in Shreveport, and we had Josh Booty on, and I wore a T-shirt and a track jacket. So
nothing wrong with that, man.
Yeah,
I underdressed for the occasion, so I appreciate that collar.
We're joined by Stephen Godfrey, our special guest today, and I really appreciate Mr. Godfrey's time, one of the leading college football writers in the country, and I know it's been a very interesting time for him recently in his profession. What's up, Mr. Godfrey? How are you?
I'm good, man. How are you? Just, another day in the 2020 news cycle.
Yeah, I can imagine. I've been following, y'all built up Banner Society, crushed it last year, but I've been following what's been going on with Box. And so are y'all basically on furlough for a couple of months is what I gather?
Yeah, some of us are, some of us aren't. And I feel like we're just like college football right now, where we think we're all coming back. We just don't know how and when and under what condition. And so it's more questions than answers. So I kind of feel like the sport that I'm covering, basically.
Yeah. How do you think y'all have handled the whole furlough thing compared to other entities, do you think?
As far as a company?
Yeah. I'm just curious because you see all this stuff, and I mean, media, people have been dropping like flies. So I was just curious if y'all's approach was any different than others.
Yeah, I don't think there's a good approach to it.
Right.
I think that sometimes I think words like furlough are, kind of tactfully employed to move around the fact that a business is trying to make cuts, and you can call it furloughs, you can call it delays, whatever. It's the bottom line is they're cutting editorial, and they're affecting people's livelihoods and jobs. Here's my talking point on all of this stuff. When people ask me about the media industry or college football or anything, is that I think this whole situation in 2020 is like a stress test. And if your company or your industry was in a good place, it's probably going to be better positioned to survive after this. But I think what COVID did was almost work as this kind of it's the way, it's like a giant X-ray on your industry. If you secretly had some bumps and bruises, or you were not the healthiest industry in the world, and it can be anything, media, it can be nursing homes, it can be, you name it. The amount of stress that COVID applied was just going to expose how healthy your business actually was. Right. And I think that, I think it's being used as an excuse by a ton of companies to claim workforce reductions and spending reductions. And, it's a wonderful blanket that everyone across the American economy gets to throw on their problems and say like, oh, well, that was because of COVID. And it's a very, very convenient catch-all for companies basically doing what they wanted to do to begin with.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I agree completely. You see it left and right.
So so right now, obviously, you got three young kids, so you got your hands full at home. And Godfrey, I grew up with Godfrey's wife, two houses down from Annabelle, so I know the family really well. Or at least you've gotten to spend some quality time at home, I would guess.
Yeah, that's a positive way of looking at it. I mean, I would definitely it's been weird for me because I think people probably don't realize that college sports media, it isn't just about September, October, November, December, January, but it's become kind of a year-round thing with the draft and with spring football. And then really there's a lot of periods of time that I think probably fans don't know about, that you go and interact with these coaching staffs, and you go and spend more, you probably almost always spend more time with a coach as a member of the media in the off season than you do during September, Labor Day through New Year's. And so that's been really dramatically affected. Last year, for instance, I was on the road more in April than I was in September.
And then you do the thing where you talk to the coaches, but just don't reveal sources for Athlon every year, right?
Yeah, so that actually hits the newsstand next. That's a wonderful little plug there, Ben. That was very good.
There you go.
Next, I want to say it's June 3rd, but it really, it's kind of old school because it depends specifically on like where you buy, magazines. You can pre-order it now if you go to Athlon, and then, if you get your stuff from like a Barnes & Noble or Walmart, it's kind of one of those things where you got to check with them. But starting next week, Athlon will actually be out on stands for the 2020 season, which is kind of crazy. And I did a feature on LSU. I did a feature on the Egg Bowl rivalry and sort of the future of it with the new coaches. And then I also did every anonymous scouting report for the FBS. So it was 134 or something like that. So that took a while. And I was working on those right as all of this stuff started. So you had a lot of kind of very strangely distracted sources in the industry and people kind of acting even weirder than they normally would. It was a strange time to be asking people, like, what do you think of your conference rivals, offense or defense? But
yeah.
That's what I was doing from like the end of February until like, gosh, I don't know, like mid-March. So right as everything was just getting super weird, I'm talking to coaches across the country trying to talk about a 2020 season, even though, we didn't even know if we'd have one.
Yeah. So I knew you did the LSU write-up, and I know you're not going to like spoil anything really, but I'm just curious. I assume it's going to be a lot about how LSU is becoming more of a national name than it has been in the past, and I'm just curious how well you think my alma mater is set up to maybe become the next power, because I kind of feel it coming, and I'm not used to feeling confident as a sports fan, and so I'm just curious what you have to, if you can sprinkle anything on that.
So basically the idea was kind of presented to me by the Athlon team, which was like, how much of LSU in 2019 is a result of just an amazing amount of circumstance, or are they really following that CEO model? Are they really doing, I kind of put it in Clemson terms for the sake of the piece. And it's not just because they played and beat Clemson in the title game. It's because, when I met with Ed Orgeron in 2016, when he was the interim head coach, like that was the model that they were openly citing in terms of how they were going to build that staff and how they were going to establish consistency. And so they really took the Clemson model in so many different ways, especially now, like just to jump way ahead, the way that they are going out and recruiting, it doesn't really have so much of a specific tie to, we're going to get this kid in Louisiana, or we're going to go to East Texas, whatever. It's, they're a national brand. They're doing as well in California as Pac-12 schools are.
Yeah,
they're doing
California,
as well
Maryland, and
yeah, I was going to say the DC metro area, which is it's kind of famously unclaimed territory. When you get to that mid-Atlantic area, there's never been a particularly, you don't have a dominant program that comes in. Penn State for years was consistent there, but it's wide open. And when a five-star emerges, what you're seeing now are SEC teams like LSU and Alabama getting in there first. All of that, I think, really came from Orgeron's time off and not being a head coach. And, just him, I don't know if he ever truly believed he'd get a second chance, but when he came in as the interim head coach, they took a lot of the org chart stuff from Clemson. And so, people ask me like, well, is LSU going to be a dynasty, or are they going to be consistent? Like, I don't think any program can be consistent enough to replicate what they did in 2019. There's way too many mitigating factors. You're not going to, let's start at the very top. Like, you're not going to replace that quarterback, immediately. You're not going to replace that play calling dynamic immediately. Like, you lost your offensive mind, if not technically your play calling. And then you go on down through the list, and then just the sheer volume of talent that went to the draft, seniors and juniors. You lost your DC, who's a really, really, really consistent presence for LSU through going all the way back to Les Miles. So they might take a step back in that they win 9 games.
Oof.
I don't think anybody should lose their mind about that, honestly, because the framework now for LSU, it used to be, this is the year we got to beat Alabama. We got to do it. We got to do it. We got to do it. And the reason why they said that was, we don't know if we ever will.
Right.
We don't know if we ever can. This was a program with a fundamental identity crisis that really struggled to distinguish itself against Alabama. Right? It was the ex-wife syndrome, having Nick Saban go and do this at a rival program in your own division. Now that they've done all that, they won the game in Tuscaloosa, they won the conference, they won the national championship. They were inarguably the best team in college football. Now you get to a completely different set of expectations. And I think as long as LSU fans embrace the long view the same way that Clemson fans do, you know, I'll be honest with you, I talked to some Clemson fans and boosters and stuff, and like certainly dejected after the national title, but not really demoralized, because if I had to pick a team to be back in the national title this year, it's Clemson, right?
Oh, of
So
course.
That's sort of like the next thing. That's the real horizon for LSU. Is not necessarily like, oh my God, Joe Burrow was amazing and he won the Heisman. It's how do you find consistent starters, you know, on 3-year clips at that position that are top caliber. And then they pretty much already do that on defense and at most of the other positions. Can they become Clemson is sort of the big question. I can't say definitively yes or no, but I think that's what LSU fans should be worried about. Not so much about like no, I don't think they're going to repeat in 2020. I don't think it's humanly possible.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that kind of is the next step, becoming like the Bama or Clemson, where they can just seemingly, you know, plug anybody in there and do that. So, yeah, no, I definitely feel good about it. And I definitely want to say to any LSU fan watching this, like, how good we have it. Like, over the last 20 years, I mean, 3 titles, like, that's like really insane. So, definitely need to, you know, be aware of that and cognizant, and just, be grateful for what we had. And I hope we can continue some level of success.
Well, I think also too, the landscape we've evaluated everything in basically the same way since the mid 2000s, which was that Saban was coming in, you know, he won a national title at LSU in a dominant fashion, was building a consistent national title contender.
Yeah.
Then he left, and then he was back in 3 years, and then ever since then, that's been the metric. He's not going to be there forever. I'm not trying to predict his retirement or anything, but I do think that if you look at an uncertain future in the SEC and you're just assuming that, you know, maybe he isn't there forever, or maybe something happens, maybe there's a shift, LSU feels as well positioned as any program to benefit off of that.
Well, one point I'm curious what you think of this is, as college football, you know, has become a spread offense game and gotten away from the line of scrimmage, power eye stuff. That's awesome for LSU because they have the best athletes, the defensive back and receiver in the country. They always do. They always have so much speed and athleticism. And so as long as they have a modern offense, I mean, they're going to have the best athletes on the perimeter, so they should be competitive for a while.
Yeah, that's a very simple line of logic that they themselves ignored for the better part of 25 years. I mean, it was to go back and watch the talent that were on some of those teams and then what they actually did. Like in terms of execution, in terms of play calling. And I'm not talking about a long, long time ago. I mean, you can really go back to the last 2 or 3 years of Miles, where I think people really kind of feel it to be an egregious, a blatant misuse of talent. I mean, the national title loss to Alabama, I think, was probably the most jarring mismanagement of talent that I've ever seen. And I know LSU fans still want to talk about like, oh, it should have been Oklahoma State or this or that, but like,
doesn't matter. Yeah.
It doesn't matter because fundamentally, like, Ed Orgeron is a recruiting savant, but he's also like, it's not that hard to bring incredible talent to LSU. I'm not diminishing what he's done, but what I'm saying is, and he knew that.
Mm-hmm.
He knew that recruiting was one thing, but they were not doing anything with the personnel once they got them on campus, or at least they weren't doing the right things in terms of offense. And that's been the biggest change. More so than anything else. You can talk about like national branding or it's this coordinator. Like the first damn thing that they did when he was interim head coach, and I was there that week, was they basically went into and I don't think people realize this, but you don't just change a playbook, especially mid-season. It's extremely hard to do. It takes a very, very long time. And like once the season starts, you're sort of cast into the ocean. Like you're at sea. You can't really change the direction of the ship too much. But what they did, he and Steve Ensminger, the first week that they had control, was take the same schemes, the same personnel, all that stuff, and just say, let's pass to run. That's it. That's all they really did in week 1. If you go back, they beat up on a not great Missouri team. But what you saw was a little bit more of a wide field, right? A little bit more of, let's put 1 or 2 skill position guys out there in space, receivers, backs, all that kind of stuff. Let's spread them out a little bit. Not running a spread, but let's just actually spread our talent out. And then when we have success, because we do have talented physical guys at those positions, we'll run off of that. This is the most like basic fundamental 101 stuff. But
Right.
I mean, I think people forget, and especially younger fans who may not know this, like LSU was bully ball. I mean, it was 1970s Michigan for so long, and that's what drove fans so crazy. So yeah, I think LSU's, look, I'll be honest, been like, I think whatever the inevitable offensive shift is, and there's one every 10 to 15 years, they're going to be well positioned because of the amount of raw athleticism that they have in their state.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So I wanted to ask about your big expose on the Ole Miss scandal, Foul Play on YouTube, which again, I watch a lot of YouTube. It's probably my most used app on my Xbox, and I encourage anyone watching this to we'll continue watching this video, and once it's over, go watch Foul Play. It's seriously, hands down the most captivating thing I've ever watched on YouTube, and still relevant as ever. And I know you were working on it for like, what was it, like 5 years, something like that. Could you kind of go into what went into making that?
Ooh. So it's
briefly.
That's a big, yeah, I was saying that's a big thing there.
Yeah.
So
Sorry.
obviously I had been covering this sort of generic concept of under the table payments and the prevalence of it and the ubiquity of it. And, I wrote the original Bagman piece in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And we took 3 individuals that represented 3 different schools, and we kind of created a composite of them. And most people to this day ask me, they're like, who is the one Bagman? I said, well, it's 3 people. We put it right there in the damn lead, but no one paid attention. And so when the Ole Miss thing started to break, it just made a ton of sense because I had people in Oxford, because I went to college there, and because of just how sort of flamboyant and really short-sighted and stupid Freeze and his, kind of inner staff were, not wanting to cheat.
That tweet, man.
But yeah, it wasn't that they wanted or wanted to cheat or did cheat. It wasn't the desire to do so or the execution thereof. It was that they did it so badly. And they did it with a lot of hubris, and they did it with really no understanding or concern on how the market would react back against them. So I started covering that just, in the traditional written sense. The opportunity came up at the time via Vox to do the show. And it was really, really tricky when we started it because, to do television effectively, you have to get people on camera. To get people on camera, they have to agree to it. And because it was an active NCAA investigation as well as a civil suit against Lewis, there weren't a lot of people that were allowed legally to talk to us. And so that's why there's a lot of shots in that TV show of me just staring at my phone because, it's basically in place of people who had agreed in principle to talk to us and just had to back out.
Right. Yeah, no, I love that so much. Just wanted to say that again.
I want to say the Egg Bowl stuff, and, obviously I'm an Ole Miss alum, and that's how I got to know Mr. Godfrey. I couldn't even watch Foul Play till 4 or 5 months ago because I was so sick of the Egg Bowl rivalry. Just anything about it, I couldn't even hardly stomach. And then I, knew it was really good and critically acclaimed, and I'm friends with you. So I'm like, okay, it's finally time to watch it. When Martin came up here, man, I couldn't believe how good it was. I mean, I knew it was supposed to be pretty good, but it was freaking incredible. And then it was just fascinating to me how the 19 Egg Bowl ended up kind of being a postlude to it at the end of the Matt Luke era and when everything that went down with the dog piss that some might say could save Ole Miss.
This was first off, thank you. Second off, I can't really look at the show period because of a number of reasons, but because you only see what's there, what you want to change. Or what's not there.
But yeah, poker's like that too. I've said that.
But so the game that we kind of centered it around that year's Egg Bowl obviously becomes so prophetic because that's the first end zone pissing, I guess we can call it, and that really sets in course kind of the ultimate demise of in a weird way both coaches at Mississippi State and Ole Miss, because I mean we knew that Mississippi State was already in contact with prospective replacements for Joe Moorhead before the game last year. And then that game kind of bought him some time, not much, but some. It's strange to think of it now in hindsight because of how much has gone on in a different way in the state of Mississippi. I do think people ask me this a lot, that because of everything that's going on, and it's all still fairly recent history, that I don't think you'll be able to. I don't think you'll be able to replicate any of this stuff anytime soon. And I also think that Kiffin and Leach are going to, maybe not intentionally, but probably just unintentionally, dial it back down in the coming years, because those guys aren't really steeped in it the same way. I think they're not natives. They've both been in Power 5 jobs for a long time, and now I think like this is a job to them. I don't. It's not going to be quite the blood feud that it was.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the Pac-12, the money's just gone so away from the Pac-12 that, it just comes down to a point. If you're wanting to make $4, $5, $6 million a year, there just aren't that many of these jobs out there. And so even with the Mississippi schools not being the traditional powers in the SEC, in the SEC West, it's still, football's so big down here, whereas it kind of feels like it's struggling out west a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, as far as like Mike taking the job, I mean, Mike always wanted to go to the SEC. He always wanted to try it, and it's not necessarily because he had like a particular desire or affinity for the region, but it's more about this sort of understanding that this is the benchmark for quality in the sport. And he's faced so much criticism in his career. I think he wanted to show that he could apply his concepts at the highest level and be successful. I mean, he was a whisper away from getting the Tennessee job before Jeremy Pruitt did, and that's why they fired their previous athletic director, John Curry. He's always wanted to get to this conference. So I think at state, it's not so much about state for him as it is just like, can I take an active SEC roster with still a very good defense and apply what I do and try and be successful? I think it's loaded against him because there's just no patience here. Like, the starts that he had at Wazoo and Texas Tech are just not going to be tolerated.
Mm-hmm. Between Leach and Kiffin, who do you think is more primed to have early success?
I think earlier is going to be Kiffin. I think later on might be Leach, because once you sort of get it rolling, mm-hmm. it becomes a very smooth machine, a very easy thing to kind of work out. They were alarmingly consistent at Wazoo and neutralized a lot of more talented opponents and gave Oregon fits and gave Arizona State fits. And, they definitely struggled against Washington, but by and large, once the machine was up on its feet in Pullman, they were very good, especially when Alex Grinch was there. I think Kiffin has the better immediate roster because of some of the skill position talent that Ole Miss has. And also, Kiffin's more of a flexible guy. I mean, he's not necessarily married to a particular scheme or playbook. I've said this a lot this offseason, but I watched him in the Sugar Bowl when you're running an entire offense through Amari Cooper when he was the OC at Alabama. Mm-hmm. He will find weird and interesting things to do with a fairly talented group of skill position players. They're still not great at depth. I mean, they're still not particularly strong, like, probation or, a coaching change, any kind of negative factor on a roster is always going to hurt the line play more, and it's going to take longer to fix that. So, it can be NCAA sanctions, it can be transfer, all that stuff. Ole Miss is still very susceptible, and it's on both sides of the ball in terms of line play. So that's why that's what hinders them the most.
I'm curious on the Kiffin front. What's interesting to me is, you've obviously covered him for a long time. Him now versus the Kiffin that took over at Tennessee in 2008. I don't want to – I mean, it's so natural to compare Kiffin to Orgeron, and that's not fair. I don't expect Ole Miss to win national titles. But do you think this, iteration of Kiffin is going to, show more – do you think he's progressed as far as showing maturity and, maybe some of the same mistakes he made back then he won't make now and has learned?
Well, as far as that 1 year at Tennessee, I think it's kind of funny because it's hard to judge in hindsight. I think they were on their way to doing something really special. I mean, when you look at it this way, he had
I like
his staff was, it was a bunch of killers. Ed Orgeron was on there for one. I mean, that 2009 Tennessee team should once all the statute of limitations expires, I think someone should write a tell-all book about that 1 year in Knoxville, because I think they were fast on their way to becoming just an absolutely, they may have gotten caught by the NCAA, but they were going to be a monstrous program. I think that we laugh about it because he was so verbal. I mean, he was so in a different way, like a different kind of Hugh Freeze. He hasn't really changed that. I think he understands rosters better. I think he understands the job better. I think he understands the management aspect of all of it better. I think that was the beauty of a job like FAU, was that he got to go back and sort of go back to the 200 level of head coaching and understand, maybe relearn some things, right? However, I mean, again, but it's just like Leach. You can throw all that out the window because, like, there's an expectation in Oxford, a floor of, I don't know, anywhere from 7 to 9 games already. So, I mean, the margins are so much smaller. I think he's going to be very different.
It is easy to forget how polarizing Kiffin was at Tennessee. Like, he started getting name dropped. There was that Lil Wayne song that he was in and stuff. And I don't know. I never really blamed him for jumping to USC because coaching is so fickle that, like, if you get that dream job that you want, you just got to go. And it obviously didn't work out particularly well for him at USC. But yeah. So what exactly? I guess leading to my question, what's the local flavor like on Kiffin in Oxford right now? I guess that's to both of
y'all. I'll answer this first. People are excited. People are excited here because Godfrey kind of mentioned it with the floors of Ole Miss fans. Look, Ole Miss fans get there in the SEC West, and it's going to be tough with LSU and Bama and superpowers. We just want to be entertained. I just want fun, exciting football, win some rivalry games. Winning 6 or 7 to 9 games and being fun is great with me, and I think Kiffin can do that up here. And also, my biggest thing is I thought that it was interesting Ole Miss scheduled USC at a home in 2025 and 26. I know this is reading too far ahead, but to me, I thought that was interesting with Kiffin, his USC ties and the fact that Arch Manning could be playing quarterback for the Rebs then. That would be if Kiffin can get it going here, man, I would love to see this happen.
Yeah, I think that ultimately there was I don't think anyone was going to tolerate the Matt Luke era in terms of results because they didn't know better. And I think a lot of the same people in power that were kind of led to Freeze's undoing. I mean, Freeze ultimately was the pilot of his own ship in that regard, but expectations in Oxford have never totally aligned with reality. But I do think there's a weird sort of tongue-in-cheek thing where it's kind of like what Ben said. Like, if you're going to do nothing, at least be entertaining, right? At least be dynamic in some capacity. And the problem was that Luke just had such a mediocre to poor roster in most regards because of what had gone on with the NCAA. I think he was a boring guy who was in charge of a boring, thankless job, which was rehabilitating that roster. And then you kind of, I was there the day they announced his hire when we were shooting the documentary, and there wasn't. Every rational person in college football knew that he was going to be there to be the custodian, and then they were going to dump him as soon as they could lure a bigger talent in. And that's exactly what happened.
It comes down to a point, too, where you got to get butts and seats and make money. And the Ole Miss program with Luke was rudderless. I remember, the FCS games or the non-SEC games. I mean, dude, if there were 10, 12,000 in that stadium total, I think I'd be highballing it. And so I think it's just the entertainment factor. The athletic department, they got to make money, So
I'll be honest. Like, people might not realize this, but he didn't get fired because of his win-loss record. I think he got fired by the sheer malaise that was running amongst donors and advertisers and just your rank and file ticket buyers. Like, it wasn't even so much bad as it was just boring.
Yeah, it was just so apathetic. That's exactly what that was.
And they really could. I think that he probably could have flipped it around. They played more underclassmen than I think any other team in the league did last year, and they showed some promise in some areas. I didn't watch every Ole Miss game, but nor would I want to. But I think that they were definitely. You couldn't really say. I interviewed someone for the Athlon piece about this. It was Cole Kubelik from the SEC Network. He's like, you couldn't look at them objectively as a football analyst and say they were headed in the wrong direction. And you could kind of say the same thing about Mississippi State as well. Like, you couldn't really say they were headed in the wrong direction. It was really more about the speed in which they were headed in any direction that pissed their boosters off.
Yeah, I like that freshman class Luke brought in. And, I got to think that Kiffin leaned Ole Miss over Arkansas because, even though Arkansas has more money, he was looking at a couple 3 and 9 years. And, it seems like maybe he could be competitive a little quicker in Oxford. That was my guess, at least.
Yeah, honestly, I think that, like, if you're a nihilist or you don't like Ole Miss and you're saying that Kiffin's taking this as like a, kind of a landing spot gig or a catapult gig to like a top 15 job, then it's a really strong, it's a spring loaded catapult for sure because of what Ben just said. Like, if you had of the jobs available, I'll just give you a great example because like this was discussed a lot in the media, was like his communication with Arkansas, his communication with Ole Miss. Ole Miss comes in second. I don't think people understand this. This has nothing to do with like a lifelong love or consideration of either program. He doesn't care. It's that you looked at the Arkansas roster, the Arkansas future prospects and recruiting, and then you looked at what Ole Miss had, and then in just a 3-year cycle, you're in the same division. You're playing the same teams, right? And I want to say Arkansas actually has some really stupid non-conference games scheduled where they're going to get mopped. I know they play TCU.
Yeah.
Like they have no business doing any of that right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think Kiffin just looked at it's like an investment opportunity, right? Are you going to dump your money for 3 years in something that you know is going to grow, or are you going to do it on what could potentially end your career? That's the other thing that people have to look at. And I talked to coaches about this. Like, every job is potentially your last because every job could bottom out. And then the perception of how that happens is going to affect your career. So if you're Lane Kiffin and you went to Arkansas and you went 3-9, like, you now have a sustained record of instability. Like, where do you go from there? Where do you go back to an FAU? So, I mean, it's very there was a lot of consideration in the job, and he knew that there were better players in Oxford.
Yeah, and you at least have a quarterback that you know is going to have some highlights at the very least. I mean, that dude can move.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's simple logic, but that's the truth. I mean, he knows that he can recruit against what he has, and he knows that what he has is better than what Arkansas has at the moment. And unfortunately for them, it's just another proposition to their boosters and their fan base of saying, all right, guys, I promise we're going to get it done this time, but it's going to take 4 to 5 years, which is the last thing that group wants to hear.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I want to ask a little bit on the 19 Egg Bowl front. Just as you were watching this, like, I was just in such sheer shock when Ole Miss scored, and then when Elijah Moore did the dog pee thing. Like, what the hell were you thinking when you saw this? As it happened in real time.
I want to say I was on the opposite side of the field because I was with a film crew that was shooting, and I'm pretty sure that I know I was there. I was on the field for it, obviously, but I don't really think I don't think I saw it because if you've never been on a field as like during a game, it's actually a bad place to watch a game. I know that doesn't make sense, but I mean that's why a lot of coordinators sit in the booth. I was in the opposite end zone talking to one of our camera guys when it happened, and at the time, I don't think people realize this. Like, without the benefit of television, it just looked like he was down and injured for a second. Like, he didn't quite, you couldn't quite figure out what was going on in the pandemonium of it all. But I remember seeing it on television. We got back, and I was just like, oh Jesus, like that's going to be. Even the reaction of it initially, knowing how angry it would make people and how much it would charge up one side of the debate over the other, I knew it was going to be big. I had no idea it would cause and do all of the things that it did. I mean, also that game essentially gets Matt Luke hired. I really do think that Dave Doran is the head coach in Oxford if they don't win that game.
Wow. Yeah, that's wild. And then you look at the 19 one and everything that the Elijah Moore incident led to. I mean, I started laughing hysterically when it happened this year when Ole Miss scored to go down by 1, because right when I saw Elijah Moore do the dog pee thing, I knew Ole Miss's kicker was so bad. I was so sure where it was headed. And
the weird thing was I don't think a lot of people were thinking like that in real time because it's actually, I know this doesn't make sense, but I've been told this for years by people in special teams. When you change anything about a PAT, it becomes infinitely harder than a field goal. I know that doesn't make sense, and it's hard to, because then in my head I'm like, well, then isn't the PAT just a field goal? But there's something about the approach and the setup and the specificity of it all. But like PATs are a particular kind of muscle memory. It's really that simple. Like it is a particular process between your brain and your body, and changing it in any way, on top of not having a great kicker to begin with, being in a hostile environment, it's just those mental tripwires, and you see him pull it, But yeah, I remember as soon as it happened, I was like, well, this is the best, or this is the worst possible situation for them to be in. Because you've now taken an afterthought and made it something that was, actually had a variable to it. And sure enough, he pulled it.
Wild. Just the wild. That was the wild. I felt like I've watched sports 30 years of my life, and I've never seen a sequence quite like the ending of that 19 egg bowl. That one was just his own thing, And also gambling. I had Ole Miss plus 1.5 and covered. We lost by 1, which I thought was hilarious. I was like laughing. And I was like, I guess granted, I look at sports a lot different. I'm a gambler and a poker guy, and so I don't look at it from like the diehard homer presence. So it's kind of like, well, Matt Luke's going to get fired and I'm going to cover the spread. Seems like a win to me. Oh, man. Well, so Godfrey, we love having you in your time. What's your next couple? So are you uncertain time, just like we're talking, you mentioned, you think y'all are going to come back, hopefully. I'm in a similar situation, kind of like an uncertain couple months.
I'm promoting the Athlon thing right now. I've got a couple things I think are going to come out with Banner Society, but yeah, it is definitely sort of a TBD thing. Podcast Ain't Play Nobody is on ice right now. So yeah, that's not a great answer, but it's kind of like, just stick with me on social media. If you've read my stuff before, like I'll be around, but I'm not sure exactly what capacity.
Fair enough. That's kind of what we're doing too, with just the YouTube channel, trying to keep the normal going. And, I'm enjoying this time a little bit. It could always be worse, I guess.
That's right, man. I'm alive.
Martin, you got any
we'll make
final
it through.
questions for Godfrey?
We actually covered just about everything. I guess I just want to just say again how much of a fan I am of you and your platform. Again, I think y'all have the best video content on all of YouTube for sports. I don't really even think it's that much. It's that debatable. And and again, I want to plug Foul Play again. If you've made it this far in the video, go watch that right now.
Yeah, and you just type Foul Play. I think just Foul Play or Foul Play Mississippi into
it should come
YouTube,
up. Yeah,
it'll show up. Yeah.
All right, well, Mr. Godfrey, thank you for your time today. I appreciate having you on the Mixing Up with Mintz YouTube channel, and congrats again on the addition to the family. I know y'all are quite a growing bunch over there in Nashville.
Yeah, hopefully not growing any more than that. So I appreciate it, man.
All right, thanks again to Stephen Godfrey. Follow him on Twitter at 38Godfrey. Please like and subscribe our YouTube channel. And we're going to, tomorrow, taking a day off. We'll be back at it on Friday. And thanks again to Stephen Godfrey for his time. And Martin, appreciate everything you're doing, bud.
Yes, sir.